Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7 here on Broadcasting Scotland. My name's Kenny McBride and I'm joined tonight by two excellent guests. Firstly by Sam Payton from the Save Loch Lomond campaign, who's on this side of me. And we're joined also by Alison Thulis MP, the SNP's Shadow Chancellor. So Alison, how are you this evening?
I'm great, good evening.
Excellent. And Sam, how are things with you?
I'm absolutely great, yes. And how's things with you, Kenny?
Not bad at all. We start this evening with our usual update on coronavirus figures. And as of 2 p.m. today in Scotland, there have been a total of 26,226 tests concluded. Of those, 21,661 were confirmed negative, 4,565 tests were positive. 193 people who tested positive were in intensive care last night. This marks an increase of 336 confirmed cases since yesterday. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the virus has sadly risen to 366. The latest UK figures available show that 7,097 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have died from their illness. A total of 232,708 people have been tested, of which 171,975 were negative and 60,733 were confirmed positive. As at 5th of April, 354 deaths have been registered in Scotland where COVID-19 was mentioned on the death certificate, according to statistics published today by National Records of Scotland. The first mention of COVID-19 in a death registration was the week beginning 16th of March this year. Between the 30th of March and 5th of April, 282 deaths relating to COVID-19 have been registered. There were 62 in the previous week and 10 in the week before. To place these statistics in context, the total number of deaths registered in Scotland from the 30th of March to 5th of April was 1,741. The average number of deaths registered in the same week over the last 5 years was 1,098. NRS statistics capture all deaths registered where the death certificate states that COVID-19 was relevant to the cause of death. This includes those where a positive test has taken place and also those where it is suspected that COVID-19 was a relevant factor, and covers all settings, including hospital and community deaths. Over 60% of all deaths involving COVID-19 were people aged 75 or over. Greater Glasgow and Clyde has recorded the highest number of COVID-19 deaths in the year up to 5th of April, with 102 deaths registered. To date, no COVID-19 related deaths have been registered in Orkney or in the Western Isles. The Scottish Government has now begun to publish a much wider range of statistics with the intention of getting a much clearer picture of how the epidemic is progressing. These statistics will include total numbers of confirmed or suspected cases in hospital and in intensive care, both in total and for each health board, NHS staff absences related to COVID-19, number of calls to 111 and the coronavirus helpline, and number of patients delayed in hospital for all reasons. The First Minister said today that these new figures should help the Scottish Government and individual health boards to better understand the impact of the illness, including helping to plan hospital capacity, identify hotspots of infection, and eventually to make decisions about when lockdown measures can be relaxed or even lifted completely. And Alison, we talk about these figures every night, but this new range of figures that we've got from National Records of Scotland, what do you think about this new development?
I think it's really important to get that wider picture of where deaths are taking place and how many people are affected, and we should always remember that it goes beyond just figures on a piece of paper or figures on our screens. These are individuals, these are people that are lost to their families, and every one of their lives matters, and we need to remember them and do our very best to try and prevent more people being added to those numbers in the days to come.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And now we come to a story that involves you specifically. The SNP's Shadow Chancellor and Work and Pension Secretaries have renewed calls for the Chancellor to bring forward stronger UK welfare protections to ensure people are not pushed into hardship and poverty because they fall through the gaps in support. Alison Thulis MP and Neil Gray MP have written to Rishi Sunak asking him to look at 4 key areas where the UK government is failing to adequately support people through the new schemes in response to COVID-19 and through the UK welfare benefits system during the coronavirus crisis. The 4 areas include delays in receiving support, especially the 5-week wait for the first universal credit payment, gaps in the support available, insufficient levels of support in social security payments, including child benefit, universal credit, and employment support allowance, and that the rate of statutory sick pay must also be increased in line with a real living wage, and the weekly earnings threshold removed so that all workers can receive SSP irrespective of their weekly earnings or national insurance contributions. The SNP has consistently called on the UK government to bridge gaps in support and strengthen welfare protections in response to the economic impact of the crisis by using the tax and welfare system to boost support and introduce a guaranteed minimum income for everyone. Neil Gray MP said, "In this time of crisis, it's crucial that everyone in our society is properly supported if they've been impacted by coronavirus and not pushed into or further into destitution and hardship because they fall between the gaps of available support. People in Scotland and across the UK are at risk of contracting coronavirus and spreading the virus to others through steps they have to take to survive because they do not qualify for support. This needs to stop." And Alison, coming back to you again, obviously this is a letter that you and Neil Gray wrote together. And it's issues that you've been campaigning on for some time, the weaknesses in the welfare system. What do you think the government could do immediately to improve matters?
Well, there's lots of things the government could do, but I think uprating the current benefits that are out there would help immensely, because we've known for a long time that people aren't getting enough money to survive on through the benefit system. That the safety net has also been cut full of holes over the years of austerity under the Tories. But what needs to happen now is for benefits like ESA, like universal credit, and supports like statutory sick pay and child benefit, they could all be put up so that people get enough money in to help them keep going through this time. But there are also gaps that are emerging within the system as well, and some of these, again, have been known to us for quite some time, but have been drawn into sharp focus by the chaos that we're seeing just now, with people not knowing what they're entitled to and not being able to access that money as well. So, for example, things like people who have no recourse to public funds. Now, that means that people who are not allowed to claim benefits, and that may be because they've come here to live from another country, they've been given status within this country, but with that status comes they're not allowed to claim any benefits. Now, those people in a lot of circumstances now won't be able to work. They won't be able to go out and earn a living at all, but also they won't be able to be entitled to benefits, and they may not be entitled to things that would help support them and see them through at the present time. So we're asking for that to be looked at again. Again, it's been a long-term unfairness, but this could affect lots of EU nationals as well, who've never had to claim benefits because most of them have been in work as well. So the government needs to look at the gaps that exist within the system and put that right quickly, because people really don't have the time to wait while the government is trying to decide what to do here.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And Sam, we've talked multiple times on this show about things like universal basic income. What do you get any suspicion? I mean, this is something that's being talked about now in Spain. It's being talked about in the US, and the SNP has been really pushing it strongly here. Do you get any feeling that this might be a turning point for that kind of policy?
I would like to see that it's going to be a turning point for that kind of policy, because it's shown that we desperately need it, because there is people falling through the cracks. And the one thing about COVID-19 and what's happening is it's showing all the kind of the failings of the welfare system at the moment. I know yesterday I was speaking to a gentleman who had been sanctioned just before lockdown, and he's not been able to get through to anyone because the lines are always jammed, and he's not been able to get any help or anything. So there is very much people that are definitely falling through the cracks. And as I say, especially people who were sanctioned just before the lockdown. People can't contact people. It's not as easy. Phone this phone number is what they keep getting told. But when the phone number's constantly engaged, because so many people are trying to get through, whereas I would have liked to have seen, when the lockdown happened, the UK government to have put in a universal payment to everybody, which would have gave people a bit more confidence, not panic as much about where they were going to be financially in a week or 2 or 3 weeks down the line. I would have liked to have seen that coming into play, definitely. But there's Yeah, but as I say, this is just showing all the kind of weaknesses that's in our welfare system currently at the moment, Kenny.
Yeah. As many of our long-term viewers will know, we're big fans of universal basic income here at Broadcasting Scotland, so we do wish you all the best with that side of the campaign, especially, Alison. Moving on though, Boris Johnson was said to be clinically stable in intensive care today and responding to treatment for COVID-19 complications, amid more questions about how key decisions would be made in his absence. Johnson, who tested positive nearly 2 weeks ago, was admitted to St Thomas's Hospital on Sunday evening with a persistent high temperature and cough, but his condition deteriorated and he was rushed into an intensive care unit. The 55-year-old Prime Minister has received oxygen support but was not put on a ventilator, and his designated deputy, Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab, said he was still in charge and would soon be back at his desk. Downing Street said that Johnson was not actively working but was able to contact people if needed. The Prime Minister remains clinically stable and is responding to treatment. He is in good spirits, Johnson's spokesman said, similar to what Downing Street has been saying over the past 2 days. Inside the government, ministers were debating how long the UK economy could afford to be shut down and the long-term implications of one of the most stringent sets of emergency controls in peacetime history. Johnson has delegated some authority to Raab, who was appointed Foreign Minister less than a year ago, though any major decisions, such as when to lift the lockdown, would in effect need the blessing of the whole cabinet. And Alison, you know, we've talked many times on the show, and I'm sure you are only too aware yourself of some of the limitations of the British system of government. There isn't an established kind of order of succession for if the Prime Minister is incapacitated. What do you think of the way things are being handled just now?
I think everybody is trying the best they can to handle things in the best way that they can, and that goes for everybody right across all different levels of government, local government, national government, and Westminster as well. And everybody is trying their very hardest here, but you're right, it is a complex and confusing system. There is no direct replacement for the Prime Minister, and I suppose this, among with many other things, draws into focus the limitations of the parliamentary system that we have, the government system that we have, and perhaps should lead us to think a wee bit more about what kind of safeguards and things that we should put in place to improve this in the future.
Mm-hmm. And what's your feeling about the fact that Boris Johnson is in an intensive care unit, while apparently not being on ventilation, apparently in relatively good condition? It does seem as somewhat similar to Prince Charles getting and his wife getting tested for the virus when they didn't appear to be in serious distress, weren't being admitted to hospital or anything. Is Boris Johnson getting privileged treatment in an NHS hospital, do you think? Or is this something that we just have to accept, that he is the Prime Minister and therefore needs to be given the best treatment possible?
Well, I think everybody should get the best treatment that they can do, and they would want to take precautions, and they certainly wouldn't have sent them to hospital lightly or unless they needed to be there, because you would want your Prime Minister to be available, you would want your Prime Minister to be chairing meetings or holding press conferences if that was at all possible. So my assumption is that he has needed to go there and that he should stay there until he's feeling better enough and well enough to be back out again.
Mm-hmm. And Sam, how are you feeling about having Boris Johnson sitting out and Dominic Raab taking over some measure of power?
These are extraordinary circumstances, really, aren't they? Nobody could have foreseen this. As much as I don't like Boris Johnson and his policies and his politics, I don't wish the worst on the man. He is a human being after all, and I would like to see him back and basically to answer to some of the decisions that he's made regarding this. So, yeah, I would like to see him back. But, yeah, having Dominic Raab right now, as I say, we're in extraordinary circumstances. Who would have thought that, this would be happening right now?
Yeah. Anyway, still on Boris Johnson, his plan to seal a deal with Brussels on the future relationship with the UK by the end of December has been described as fantasyland by EU officials, as a leaked letter revealed the scale of the EU's inability to function during the coronavirus pandemic. European Council headquarters, where member states' positions are coordinated, is only able to hold one daily video conference due to a lack of facilities. The capacity to carry out work there is 25% of what it would usually be. The leaked letter from Michael Klaus, the German ambassador to the EU, to his political bosses in Berlin said a range of issues not key to rebuilding from the pandemic would need to be sidelined as a result. An EU official said that while the European Commission, which is in charge of talks with the UK, had better facilities for remote negotiation, it would be impossible for the member states to have the same input through the EU Council. This would make a successful negotiation nearly impossible. The December timeline for agreeing a deal with the EU, which was already hopelessly optimistic, was described as like fantasy land by one source. The UK can agree with the EU to extend the transition period by up to 1 or 2 years if necessary, but Downing Street insisted that it would not do so. And Alison, we've been saying for some time that this December deadline was a real concern because it left very little time for adequate negotiation, and now coronavirus has thrown an enormous spanner in the works. Do you get any sense from the British government that they are willing to maybe extend that timeline a wee bit so that negotiations can now be conducted?
I mean, they certainly seem to be sticking to the line that all of this is going to go ahead as if normal, but these are not, by any manner of imagination, normal times. These are very, very difficult times, not just for us, but for Europe as well. You've got Spain and Italy really, really struggling. You've got other countries in Europe dealing with this as well. So I think it's not just an issue about the UK's position, it's the issue about the rest of Europe and our ability to come together to even attempt negotiations at this. I think the UK government really need to be far more realistic about this. When we look to the months ahead, we see all the things that have been cancelled from here all the way through to the COP in Glasgow. All of these things have been put to one side, all of them very, very important. And I think the UK are going to have to come to the conclusion that Brexit is just going to have to wait.
Yeah, of course, lots of us have suspected that part of the reason for this very hard deadline that Boris Johnson has insisted over and over again was never going to be moved is that a no-deal Brexit was the actual goal, that they actually wanted to escape without having negotiated very much. Do you get this? Do you still get that sense?
It's difficult to get a real sense of where, because Parliament's not meeting just now, you're not hearing from the sort of people who are the most keen on Brexit at the moment. So it's difficult to get a sense of quite where they all are now, because it has been the sort of the Tory backbenches that have pushed the hardest for this, the hardline Brexiteers. And I think it would be interesting to hear now where they are thinking and whether they're still going to say to the government, no, you need to press ahead, or whether they too have come to the conclusion that this has to wait. And the government is more than likely to listen to those people far more than they will do to me or to anybody from the government's official opposition. But I think they really do need to consider how they plan to make this happen. One way or the other, if it is a no-deal Brexit, they still need to make the plans for that to happen. And the services that are required to do that through HMRC, through other systems, they're just overwhelmed at the moment doing the business of trying to get money out the door to help support people.
Mm-hmm. And Sam, when we look at this situation in the EU, clearly they're really struggling just to do their ordinary day-to-day business. And then we do, as Alison said, have countries like Italy and Spain, which are facing these massive crises. Virtually every country in Europe is facing a crisis of some level. What do you think there's a role for the EU in helping Britain build back from this?
Well, of course there is. The end of the day, we're going to need, every country is going to have to, around the world is going to have to be able to support each other and help each other out. I think we would be quite naive to think we could do this without any EU aid or assistance. I would like to think that they, at the moment, they would seriously be considering not the deadline in December, changing that. even if they've got to postpone it, I would like to see it cancelled, but even if they've got to postpone it. But we are going to need assistance from the EU to build the economy back up. And that's going to have to be worldwide, to be honest with you. No country's going to be able to recover from this on their own. I just don't see any country at all in the world going to be able to stand on their own right now to repair their economies.
Yeah. And Alison, on that note, we obviously have countries, from the US, the biggest, most powerful economy in the world. China, obviously, most populous country in the world, have been two of the worst hit countries by this. How much international cooperation do you think we can expect going forward? This has been a time, I think, of increased nationalism, increased isolation by lots of countries. Do you think that this is going to kind of turn the corner on that, and we'll see more countries cooperating internationally?
I would very much like to hope so, and that's always my hope in life, that there will be international cooperation and people can find ways of coming across whatever divides exist. But I think as we move forward, if we're trying to build up all of our economies afterwards, it will have to be through cooperation, through collaboration, and through joint working in order to make that happen. Because if we all shrink into our own smallness, if every country sort of shrinks in that way, it'll be really, really difficult to rebuild afterwards.
Mm-hmm. Well, we do hope that it is possible to recover from this. Clearly, it's going to be a big challenge for all of us. Moving on, though, data gathered from 2 million people in Britain using a new COVID-19 symptom tracker app suggests that lockdown measures are slowing the spread of the disease, researchers said today. The rate of new coronavirus symptoms reported in Britain has slowed significantly in the past few days, the scientists from King's College London have said. Their latest figures suggest that around 1.4 million people in Britain aged between 20 and 69 currently have symptomatic COVID-19, a fall from 1.9 million on April 1st, as some have recovered and fewer people report new symptoms. The drop in new symptoms suggests that although the numbers of COVID-19 patients being admitted to hospital are still rising, as are the numbers dying, these should start to fall in about 2 weeks if distancing measures are kept in place. Tim Spector, who led the King's team analysing the data, said the signs were encouraging. Even though hospital admissions and deaths are still on the rise, we hope that these figures offer a much-needed light at the end of the tunnel, he said. Spector's analysis comes after preliminary work by researchers at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, published a week ago, also showed that social distancing may already be working by dramatically reducing the number of daily contacts between people. And Sam, this is the news that we all want to hear, isn't it? This has got to be good news.
Yeah, it's the wee kind of good news story, isn't it? But then again, we still need to be very cautious because we don't want to jump the gun and turn around and say, right, that's it, it's starting to slow down, and then everybody kind of go run outdoors. I was using this wee app. It's actually really good, and I was actually using it up until last week, and it's a great way of tracking, symptoms, because not everybody needs to see a GP, not everybody needs to go to hospital. So it was a great way of keeping track of all the symptoms, and I was quite glad when I had found it. But no, it is good. But yeah, we just need to be very cautious at the moment, and we're not kind of jumping the gun too much, and a wee bit of kind of, what's the word? False safeness at the moment. That's not a phrase or a word, but you know what I mean. Because it's the symptoms are kind of falling, but as social distancing is working, the problem is a lot of the symptoms don't show up for a period of time. So there could be people out there who have still contracted COVID-19. They are social distancing, they're just not showing any symptoms at the moment. So if we were to come out of lockdown and they were to start, then obviously it all kind of kicks off again. So I think we still need to be kind of wary of that, but it's nice to have a wee bit of good news during at the moment. Any good news is welcomed.
Yeah. And Alison, I mean, given that we've got 60,733 cases confirmed positive, but this app showing almost 1.5 million people as having all the symptoms. How big an issue do you think that is, this difference between the numbers that are being tested and confirmed with the disease versus the number who appear to have symptoms? And we may have, this massively larger number of people who are still infected.
I think everyone accepts that the numbers that are likely to have been or are currently infected is much larger than anything that we're going to be able to pick up by tests, just in a practical sense. And the best advice that I've heard through this is just to behave as if you already have it. Stay away from people, stay back, stay inside, don't go about your business as if everything was fine. And I think if we can stick to the rules that are in place, we've got a far better chance of beating this virus than if we were to say, oh, well, I've got this app, I've done this test, everything's okay now. I think we need to behave as if we have it and try and protect other people first and foremost.
Yeah. And do you have any insight or any kind of predictions on when we might see relaxations in some of the lockdown measures?
I don't have any predictions on that, no, and it is really contingent on people doing their bit just now. The more that we can stick to the rules just now, the more likely we are to see a way out of this. And I think it's if people start sort of thinking, oh no, it's okay now, I can go out, I can go about. You can't, quite simply, you just can't until we get much further through this. And certainly my assumption is, I've got 2 kids who are off school, they're at home just now. My assumption is that will be for some weeks to come, and they may not get back to school before August. So we just have to kind of prepare ourselves and be ready for that, because a couple of weeks, relatively speaking, isn't too bad. Longer than that will be harder, and we need to be mindful of that.
Yeah, it's a real challenge for anybody, I think, especially with young kids. I think that long stretch from before the Easter holidays right up until the end of the summer holidays, that's going to be really difficult for a lot of families. So we do hope that this good news continues to come in, and that we can get get back to normal, or some sense of normal, as soon as possible. Meanwhile, in the US, Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont is dropping out of the 2020 presidential race. His campaign announced in an email to supporters today. Sanders' exit from the race makes former Vice President Joe Biden the presumptive Democratic nominee in the race against President Donald Trump. In an address from his home in Burlington, Sanders said that his path to the nomination had become virtually impossible, and that the country should stay focused on handling the coronavirus pandemic as it sweeps the country. I cannot, in good conscience, continue to mount a campaign that cannot win and which would interfere with the important work ahead of all of us, he said. Sanders congratulated Biden and called him a very decent man, but he stopped short of officially endorsing Biden and said he would keep his name on the ballot in all the remaining primary races in an effort to collect enough delegates to influence the party platform. Sanders started well with a series of wins in the first 3 states to vote, but struggled badly in South Carolina, then failed to pick up momentum on Super Tuesday. He subsequently lost key states like Michigan and Florida to Biden, making his nomination almost impossible. A veteran progressive and self-described democratic socialist, Sanders built his campaign on calling for a political revolution and skewering the political establishment on both left and right. His advocacy for universal health care and workers' rights was the backbone of a campaign built on turning out younger voters and a largely disengaged working class. But hostile media, a wider slate of candidates than in 2016, and a reluctance to build alliance with important political figures made it very difficult for him to replicate his successes when facing Hillary Clinton 4 years ago. And Sam, we've talked a great deal about the American presidential primaries on this program. I know Chris, our dear socialist friend, was very much behind Bernie Sanders. What do you make of this, that Joe Biden is now the last man standing?
Oh dear, it's a shame because, Bernie Sanders seemed to be able to kind of make a wee difference. And I can get why he's dropped out, because really at the moment, the coronavirus, COVID-19 is taking precedence at the moment over a campaign. So I completely get that and wish him all the best for the future. Joe Biden, well, we'll just need to wait and see what happens. I mean, is the election going to still go ahead in America? I mean, that's the thing. Will it still go ahead? Will it be postponed? With COVID-19, we don't really know what's going to happen, really. To be honest with you.
Yeah, and Alison, as Sam says, there is potentially a question over what happens if the pandemic continues to be in effect in November. Of course, this comes, Bernie Sanders' withdrawal comes after the Wisconsin primary yesterday, which there was a Supreme Court decision that it should go ahead after some people in Wisconsin had tried to stop it. Ruth Bader Ginsburg wrote an excellent minority opinion saying that it shouldn't go ahead because people shouldn't have to risk their lives just to vote. What do you make of the whole situation in the US just now?
But I think there's a huge amount of sadness that I have for people in the US at the moment, and the call for universal healthcare could not have come at really a better time, given how catastrophic the situation is for many people's health there. And you look at the figures coming out of New York and the situation there, for example, if that is replicated in other parts of the United States, then they have a very difficult year ahead of them. And you look to November, to the run-up to the presidential race, and you do wonder whether or not that's going to be practically possible for people to go and campaign in the way that Americans are used to campaigning. All these mass rallies, all these people out in the streets and knocking doors and trying to drive the vote out. I think that would be incredibly difficult if the situation in New York is replicated in other parts of the states in the months ahead.
Yeah, and Donald Trump, his personal approval rating bizarrely has risen during the crisis, much the same as we've seen here, even while people have got very significant criticisms of how he's acted, how he's handled the crisis. What do you make of that? The fact that both here and in the States, two leaders who have not necessarily made the right decisions at every point in the crisis have still seen their popularity rise. Do you think that's something that is just inevitable in a crisis like this, where people need someone to rally behind, or is there something else going on?
I think it can be a thing where people just feel as though they have to get behind the government of the day in a crisis, whoever that government happens to be. And you do see, and I suppose for more positive sense for me in the SNP, that the approval ratings for the SNP have also gone up in the recent opinion polls. But for as long as this lasts, that isn't necessarily going to be the case all the way through this crisis. And while you want to get behind your government, you cannot necessarily step away from areas where criticism is due. So for Trump particularly, the things that he said, the things that he has done and not done in this crisis may make this crisis worse. And if people do see that reflected in their own lives, that's perhaps something to watch for in the weeks and months ahead as well. And often I'd heard it said as well that some of the state leaders have actually come into their own as part of this. They're looking to their local state leaders in New York with Andrew Cuomo and to take on that leadership role that the president is not fulfilling at the moment. Yeah.
And Sam, just finally on this subject, Joe Biden has been subject recently to an accusation of, I believe it was attempted rape of a young woman that had been working for him. That means that potentially we've got two candidates battling it out for the US presidency who both have been credibly accused of sexual assault. What do you think that says about the world that we live in?
Oh, crikey, there's so much I can say, but I don't think any of it I can say legally on the air. Basically, you've got to... I'll go for the diplomatic response rather than my own personal response. You've got to allow the legal system to deal with it, and hopefully they deal with it in the correct manner. And wherever there's kind of wrongdoing, justice is served, and I think that's all I can say on it. That's all.
No, I do understand your wariness there. But yeah, it's a very difficult thing for, I think, especially a lot of women on the left in America. I think it's posing a real problem, because clearly Trump's not good, but is it necessarily any better to replace him with someone else who might have some skeletons in his closet? We do move on though, and confusion about whether millions of cats should be placed on lockdown has created alarm among pet owners. Cat owners crashed the website of the British Veterinary Association today after it appeared to suggest the UK's estimated 10.9 million cats should be on curfew during the outbreak. The association was forced to clarify that only cat owners who are self-isolating with symptoms of the virus should keep their pets indoors, after a study found that cats can spread the coronavirus. Number 10 has been openly flouting the revised advice while the Prime Minister has been suffering from coronavirus. Larry, the now number 10 cat, has been free to wander up and down Downing Street, and he was photographed waiting to be let in yesterday as Boris Johnson was being treated in intensive care. And last week, while the Prime Minister was self-isolating, Larry was photographed having his tummy tickled by a Downing Street policeman. He may now have to undergo a spell of isolation to comply with the new guidance. The Veterinary Association's president, Daniela dos Santos, made clear that cats from infected or self-isolating households should be kept indoors. We are not advising that all cats are kept indoors, only cats from infected households or where their owners are self-isolating, and only if that cat is happy to be kept indoors. Some cats, of course, cannot stay indoors due to stress-related medical conditions. And Sam, as a cat owner yourself, what are your thoughts on this story?
Sorry, I was giggling all the way through that there. As a cat owner, as we have seen by Rihanna jump on screen in a previous show, I would, my Rihanna would go absolutely ballistic if I was to keep her in. I've seen, even today in local social media pages, people were asking, do I keep my cats in? Life goes on as normal for my cats. Fair dues, before the lockdown, I was symptomatic and I was showing symptoms of coronavirus. But I don't know if I had it or not because I wasn't tested. But however, in general, my cats don't actually come near you when you're kind of ill. They kind of disappear. They kind of think, oh no, I'm not going near you. And they find someone else in the family to feed them and look after them. But no, I think people are panicking. Because from what I read and the information I read on the COVID-19, cats can catch it, but they cannot necessarily transmit it back to humans.
No, exactly.
I might be wrong, but that's what I'm led to believe. And I know that I've got a couple of cats and none of mine showed any symptoms at all of coronavirus. And if anything, I would... if I was to lock down my, especially Rihanna, she would wreck my house. She would actually kill me in my sleep, I think. I don't think I would get away with it. She would actually, if you knew Rihanna's temperament, if she doesn't get her own way, she wakes you up in the middle of the night and she kind of does everything to disturb your sleep to get you back. No. At the end of the day, it's all about being sensible and a bit of common sense. We're in lockdown. Cats that are outdoor cats that are used to going out, you've got to let them out because otherwise they will get stressed out and they will just start wrecking your house and you. They'll start attacking you as well because they're used to getting outside. And a lot of cats, when they're outside, they don't actually go into contact. It's very few cats that are outdoor cats will actually go into contact with other humans. Or they'll go to certain houses where a wee treat will be thrown out, on the door. But it's very rare they'll actually, kind of go in and out of other people's homes. So, I think it's a bit of common sense, isn't it?
Yeah, we should stress, as Sam said there, cats can't transfer the virus back to humans as far as we know. So you shouldn't necessarily be terrified if you see a cat that might be, out when it shouldn't be. But just as Sam said, use a wee bit of common sense, and we should be okay. Anyway, moving on, and back in Scotland, Ian Blackford MP has slammed Airbnb for continuing to advertise and let holiday homes in Scotland during the coronavirus pandemic, describing the actions as beneath contempt. The SNP Westminster leader has written to Airbnb over the company's decision to continue advertising hundreds of holiday homes across Scotland, despite the coronavirus lockdown and clear warnings for people to avoid travel. Ian Blackford urged people to stay at home this Easter weekend and said companies must not put profits before people's lives. And on a similar story, Ireland's police chief has told people who broke coronavirus containment rules to travel to holiday homes that they must stay put until the restrictions are lifted, in a warning to others not to be tempted. With weather improving ahead of the Easter holiday weekend, Irish Commissioner Drew Harris said police patrols had noticed discipline starting to slip, with people making non-essential journeys and even holding house parties. Irish citizens were ordered on March 27th to stay at home until at least this Sunday, limitations that the country's chief medical officer said yesterday he did not expect to be lifted this week. The regulations make it clear that if you're at your holiday home already now, you need to stay there. That is now your place of residence, Harris told reporters earlier today. If you're thinking of travelling there, don't. A journey to a holiday home is not an essential journey. We will be able to turn you back. Stay put. And Alison, we've heard numerous cases, obviously, the royal family all decanted to their holiday homes. We've heard various other stories about people kind of trying to escape to the Highlands and whatnot. What do you think of this, particularly the comment about Airbnb that Ian Blackford raised?
Well, this is hugely frustrating, and Ian Blackford's now been raising this issue for weeks of people trying to escape to the Highlands. People just shouldn't be doing this. It puts enormous strain on the local health services, which just aren't large enough to cope with an influx of people. It takes those services away from serving the local populations, and it actually causes some degree of fear and alarm in local populations as well, because they don't want to see hordes of people coming in their camper vans and their cars, escaping from cities like London, which have had huge amounts of coronavirus outbreak. It puts people very much on edge when this happens, and Airbnb have had fair warning about this, that it's not acceptable to continue letting out properties. But as Ian is saying, they seem to be continuing to do this oblivious, and it really has to stop. Yeah,
and Sam, you're out in the country there. Have you seen many people kind of trying to sneak into their holiday homes out where you are?
I love how you say I'm out in the country. Believe it or not, I'm right. Well, as you know, I'm right on the A82. But where my house is situated, we can't actually see the A82. We can just hear it. And going by the reports on, watching Ian Blackford and other MPs and MSPs, there is certainly a kind of influx of motorhomes and things on the roads, but I can't actually see it. But what I can do is hear at certain times of the day, the road does sound quite busy, and then other times of the day it's really quiet. So I really can't answer that, as I say, but I know locally we've got quite a few car parks now closed. I believe the car parks at Ballach have been closed and Luss have been closed. Because there was a kind of influx of visitors, which is a shame for people, especially in Ballach, because you've got some council estates round about there and things where people are living in flats and stuff, and that's if they're, that might be their only form of exercise, in that area, and if they car parks and places are being closed off, that's affecting the locals' ability to get out and get a bit of fresh air as well. So it's a shame. It's having a knock-on effect. Can understand why the car parks are being closed, but it's still kind of it is a bit of a shame, because round about Ballach Country Park where the car parks is, there's also shops and things like that as well. So anybody visiting the shops for any shopping do tend to use the car parks, and there's a chemist round about there in Ballach as well next to the car park. So it's a shame because it's going to affect the locals more so than the visitors. But yeah, there's, from what, as I say, I've not actually seen it. It's just what you're seeing on the local social media pages at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, all these places are still going to be there after the crisis is over, and I'm sure they'll be delighted to have a big influx of tourists then. But for now, really, if you're thinking about making a wee trip somewhere into the country, then please don't. Anyway, we move on to the Faroe Islands, and a scientist who adapted his veterinary lab to test for disease among humans rather than salmon is being celebrated for helping the Faroes avoid coronavirus deaths, where a larger population of the population has been tested than anywhere else in the world. The archipelago in the North Atlantic currently has only one person in hospital with COVID-19, and it's one of 5 European countries, along with Latvia, Georgia, Malta and Liechtenstein, which so far have experienced no deaths as a result of the virus. Today, the country's Prime Minister, Barbara Stig Nielsen, announced that as of the 20th of April, the country's kindergartens, nurseries and early years classes in primary schools would reopen. Pupils in the last year of secondary school will also return to class, and sport will recommence without spectators. The success of the Faroese approach is said by local politicians to be largely a result of the foresight of the veterinary scientist Debes Christensen, the head of department at the National Reference Laboratory for Fish and Animal Diseases in the capital, Tórshavn. Christensen had warned the government of the self-governing territory as early as January of the need to prepare for the possible spread of the disease from China. His lab, which was geared to test salmon for infection, was adapted, and he purchased the extra ingredients required to test humans. According to official records, 10% of the population of 61,000 people have now been tested for the coronavirus. Faroese doctors have been able to track and quarantine everyone who has had contact with the 184 people who had tested positive for the virus. Of those who have fallen ill, 131 have fully recovered. And Alison, I mean, this is obviously in a very small country like the Faroes, there are economies of small scale that makes this an easier kind of thing to cope with. But that's really remarkable numbers in the Faroes, isn't it?
It is, and they've reacted well to the situation from what you're describing there. I think that's perhaps the difference from what's happened there to what's happened in other countries. That the UK will have had similar advice from experts coming through, but they reacted to it in an entirely different way. The testing that began at the start of this didn't continue, and now we're in the situation that we're in today. And I think it is about being responsive. It is about taking on board the evidence. And it is about paying attention to those experts right at the very beginning and acting upon that advice.
Mm-hmm. I mean, we were reporting on the coronavirus epidemic as it was happening in China back in January. What is it that you think has stopped the UK from reacting then, when it did seem, at least at the end of January, when the WHO announced an international emergency? What do you think has happened, not just in Britain, but in other countries like Spain, Italy, the US, that has slowed that response?
Well, I can only speak from what I've seen in Westminster, in the Parliament there, and it just feels as though things are moving incredibly slowly, and the UK government were just not taking this seriously enough. It felt as though it was something that happened somewhere else to somebody else, rather than something that we ought to have been planning for and preparing for, as they seem to have done in a far more sensible way in the Faroes. Yeah.
Well, we move on now to some good news, and the Scottish Government has pledged £750,000 to support a group of veterans' charities. The Unforgotten Forces Consortium, which is made up of 16 separate charities, will receive £250,000 each year for the next 3 years to help with their work. The consortium, which is led by Poppy Scotland and focuses on improving the health, well-being and quality of life for veterans aged 65 and older, was previously supported by the UK government. However, existing funding arrangements are due to cease at the end of June 2020. Minister for Parliamentary Business and Veterans Graham Day has now agreed to provide the 3-year funding package to support the consortium. In addition, he's writing to the Treasury to request the UK government makes a substantial contribution to the consortium to enable the continuation of its work. Mr. Day said, "The work that these charities are doing for Scotland's community of older veterans is having a remarkable and positive impact. As Minister for Veterans, I have great admiration for them. In recognition of their efforts, the Scottish Government is providing £750,000 of funding so that they can continue to support our older veterans for a further 3 years. I'm also calling on the UK Government to meet their responsibilities to veterans in Scotland by joining with us in providing further substantial funding to the Unforgotten Forces Consortium." And Sam, this is one of those issues where it's the military, of course, is a reserved matter, but we see the Scottish Government stepping in to deal with a lack of funding from the UK Government. What do you make of this story?
I think it's fantastic, especially when I live in an area where there's quite a lot of people that go into the military historically, and one of the issues we see is people suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder and mental health, a lot of mental health, substance abuse and things like that. And a lot of the times veterans of young and old don't get the necessary help. There's as much as there's a lot of help and support there's still people that fall through the cracks. And I know in my area there is a group of veterans who came together, set up a charity, and basically they've all went for their training and counselling and so forth, and they support each other, which is fantastic. My neighbour next door is one of the main ones involved in this, and it is a great thing. And I hear all the stories and things, and they've set up a wee mini museum at Dumbarton Central train station as well, and it's great to see that, you know, people are getting support, people who would normally not get the kind of level of support that they're needed, because I think it's one of these things that's quite complex when you've been in the military. You know, when you come back out to civil life, it's a different world, it's a different way of life, and if you are a civilian you don't quite get that. And it's helping people to just readjust again and dealing with substance abuse as well. So I think it's great, and I would like to see more Scottish Government get involved in these kind of things as well, with the kind of local charities regarding the veterans and things like that.
Well, we move on now to some more financial support. A £5 million package of emergency financial support is being put in place to help students facing hardship as a result of the coronavirus outbreak. Extra cash will be available to any university and college students now struggling as a result of COVID-19, including those attending private institutions. The £5 million includes an additional £2.2 million for Scotland's higher education discretionary fund, specifically to address COVID-19 related hardships, which will be available to colleges and universities immediately. University and college students will be able to apply for any emergency discretionary payments directly to their own institutions. And if you want to find out information about that, you can go to studentinformation, all one word, .gov.scot. Alison, what do you make of this announcement from the Scottish Government?
I think this is really brilliant news, because I've got lots of constituents who are students who live in student accommodation. They're struggling, some of them, to get out of those student accommodation contracts, and at the same time they're not able to work because lots of the jobs that they were doing were 0 hours contracts, in jobs like catering and retail, which are now all shut down at the moment. So I think this is really welcome to see that additional support for students. It's very much needed.
Yeah, absolutely. And finally, payments worth £19.1 million have been made to almost 6,000 farmers and crofters in Scotland's most remote and rural areas from the less favoured area support scheme. The majority will receive balance payments on top of the 95% loan paid between January and March this year. Rural Economy Secretary Fergus Ewing said, "It's vital that we continue to support those who most need it during these unprecedented times, and this common agricultural policy funding supports farmers and crofters on some of Scotland's most challenging land." For a long time, Scotland was the only part of the UK to offer this extra support for farmers and crofters through the CAP scheme. We know it can be a lifeline payment for many, and at this difficult time, it will provide a welcome boost to incomes. I would encourage farmers and crofters to use their CAP payments to pay their bills and make investments for the seasons ahead, to keep the food supply chain moving and keep money flowing through Scotland's rural economy. And Alison, just come back to you on that one. Again, all of these really issues, all talking about those cracks in the system, those gaps in the system that we were talking about at the top of the programme.
Yeah, and I think when we look at the scale of the support that's needed, you see just how complex the economy that we have is. There are people working in jobs that are entirely different, but both groups of people need that support. You couldn't perhaps get more different than crofters and city centre students, but the support schemes that are out there need to cover as many people as they possibly can.
Yeah, and that's exactly why something like a universal basic income is such a good idea, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, that is just about all we've got time for this evening. I'd like to thank both of our guests. It's been a real pleasure as always. I would like to thank you at home for joining us as well. Without an audience, it wouldn't be worth putting these shows on at all. If you're able to support Broadcasting Scotland, we would ask you, please, if you can afford it, go to broadcastingscotland.scot/register. Sign up as a supporter. Your £5 a month can make a huge difference to keeping Broadcasting Scotland going and to helping us grow the channel into the kind of broadcasting service that Scotland deserves. We do have a special fundraising campaign on just now. We mentioned this first yesterday. We're trying to invest in our remote production capacity so that we can bring in more guests from remote areas, remotely, I should say, as we have done tonight. We're stretching our bandwidth and our technological capabilities to the limit, having 2 guests coming in at once just now. So if you're able to contribute a wee bit extra just now, then that will go towards that £3,000 target that's going to transform the way that we can produce programmes, the kind of bringing in remote guests, especially for things like the 700 live Ceilidh that we had on Saturday to mark the signing of the Declaration of Arbroath. If you're not able to support us financially, though, please don't feel bad about it. We do understand, we've been talking about it all night, that times are tough for lots of us. And if you're not able to support us financially, please don't feel bad about it. Your viewership is what really matters, but you can help us still by following us on Twitter at Broadcast Scot, following us on Facebook, and you can then share the programme around, let people know that you watch. Tell them why you watch, tell them what Broadcasting Scotland's about and why you think it's important. We believe very firmly that Scotland needs a strong, independent broadcaster as we move forward towards a brighter future for the whole country. So if you're able to do that, then that's a tremendous help to us as well. And finally, if you're willing to get involved in Broadcasting Scotland, we always have a need for journalists, for technicians, for people to work behind the camera, and for people to work in front of the camera. We've got me and we've got Gordon, who'll be here tomorrow night. But it would be nice if we had 1 or 2 more people to appear on screen. We do, of course, have Sam as well, whose afternoon show will be starting very soon. But we would love to expand our range of presenters as well, if only so that some of us can get a wee break now and again. But that is, as I say, all we've got time for tonight. So once again, thank you very much to Alison Thulis. Thank you to Sam Payton. Thank you very much, both of you, for joining us. Thank you at home again. As I said, Gordon will be back tomorrow at 7 with another Scotland at 7. But until then, I've been Kenny McBride. Have a great evening.